The land that we come from, the land, the territories for indigenous people like Chepang, the land is life.
Welcome to Crossing Thresholds Religion, Resilience, and Migration, a special mini series of Walk, Talk, Listen, produced with the Joint Learning Initiative on Faith and Local Communities and based on new research with Christian Aid. In this series, we highlight personal stories and lived wisdom from people navigating climate impacts, faith, culture, and movement. We invite you to join us.
My name is Maurice Bloem, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen. Okay, good day, everybody. This is another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen, and actually of a special series of Walk, Talk, Listen called Crossing Thresholds. And we bring the faith and climate migration research to life through lived experience. In this episode, my guest will help us to see how climate change affects indigenous communities long before migration begins through spiritual loss, environmental strain, and faith shaped decisions about whether to stay, adapt, or leave. And as always, I'm delighted with today's guest who will introduce himself. Biswash, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Maurice, for this platform to share my experience, lived experiences, and bring out the realities that we have faced, that we have come up from, especially coming from indigenous community in Nepal. So I'm looking forward to it. Yes, thank you. Thank you for this platform.
Yeah. No, and I'm looking forward to this conversation, Biswash. So I would love to hear about your upbringing as a Chepang indigenous person in Nepal, the landscapes and communities that shaped you, and how you first began reflecting on faith, spirituality, and identity. And you decide what you would like to highlight: your family, the land, education, community, or any defining moment. Please tell us, Biswash.
Okay, thank you, Maurice, again. And so my name is Biswash Chepang, and Chepang is the community that I belong. So Chepang means is one of the indigenous community that is classified as highly marginalized by the government of Nepal based on different indicators such as access to education, access to health services, access to infrastructures, employment, income, housing structures, and so on, many and many more socioeconomic indicators. So the community is classified as a highly marginalized category and it's indigenous. It's native to four different districts in Nepal. And Chitwan, Makwanpur, Gorkha, and Dhaling. These are the four major districts that community is residing. So I'm I'm sometimes proud to say that I am the first graduate who did international degree from the entire community. And actually, I was the first one to do my MPhil, Masters of Philosophy, uh, in Development Studies from the entire community of total population of 84,364 in Nepal. And so recently, some of my colleagues have started completing MPhil as well. So education wise, the community still lacks access to education, and the literacy rate is 48.80 percent in Nepal. That means like around half of the population is literate, but the term literacy can also be a bit more confusing because
Mm.
sometimes how the government categorize that literacy it can be different, because if people can able just be able to sign, and they might consider it as literate, but that will not be the same as who can read and write and thoroughly read those paragraphs. And so I belong to this one of the community that has recently shifted to agriculture stage from
Mm.
hunting and gathering stage. So it's been around 100 years that this community has shifted to agriculture stage. And my community still, some of the area still practices hunting. We are good at hunting bats, and
Mm.
we have a different relationship, and we have interrelationship with the bats, and there are some trees as well which we consider as sacred. And so being indigenous, with the land that we come from, so we worship the land, we
Mm-hmm.
worship the territories, we worship the forest, we worship the rivers. So the religion um, that we follow is more of a animism. It's more
Mm.
like natural religion. And but with these changing times, changing um, globalizations, modernizations, people have started adopting the major religion, which is celebrated, which is followed by the dominant society, such as Hindu. So we
Mm.
follow Hindu festivals, Hindu cultures, Hindu traditions these days, but there are still some festivals that we that is celebrated by Chepang community only.
So,
And
yeah.
one more thing is majority of our community has now been converged into Christianity because of different reasons, and we can delve more deeper into that. But okay,
Mm-hmm.
this is the basic of my community, and community has good knowledge of natural resources, medicinal resources, and it is also practicing shamanism, the traditional healing practices. So we have, although like we, the young generations, may not possess those healing knowledge, traditional spiritual knowledge, but our father and grandfather is still practicing, and people still go to the shamans to cure when there is any illness.
The JLI Christian Aid Evidence Review shows that climate migration is often preceded by prolonged environmental, social, and economic stress. Biswash's account illustrates how these pressures accumulate long before any movement occurs.
Before we talk maybe more about climate and as well as faith, and because I really think it's interesting to know more about as well. But you have written powerfully about the Chupang land, forest, and spiritual life. And so,
Yes.
could you take us maybe into that place? What did it mean to grow up Japan? And what did land, forest, and community teach you before you maybe even had words like faith or climate change?
Okay, thank you. So, mm, the land that we come from, the land, the territories for indigenous people like Chepang, the land is life.
As we have mentioned in earlier episodes of this special podcast series, the report shows that climate migration often begins long before people move. Here, Biswash makes that visible. When land is life itself, losing land is not relocation, it's losing a relationship.
Because everything belongs to land, and whatever wherever we are born. Um, so we have a belief that whatever we have is, we are born and goes to the land. We come from the land and it goes to the land, and that's the one. And so from birth to death, all of these trajectories, our entire practice is connected with these land and nature. For example, even during the birth ceremony, um, so even during the birth ceremony, the navel of indigenous Chepang children is cut, and that is hung in one of the trees, and some of them are even buried. Some of them buried. Some of them hangs in the tree, so that's showing the connection with the land, connection with the nature, and that we belong to these, and we also are born into this, and we will once we die, so the it also should go to the nature. So we have a practice of actually burying the dead body in the soil, in the soil, so that even our dead body will be contributing to the land. So that's our belief actually. And we are so much connected with these lands because so the livelihood and all every other things is more dependent on the resources that is available there. So we worship these lands, and all the spiritual ceremonies practice is connected with the lands. And in Nepali we call it bhumi, bhumi. So we worship our land on different festivals, different celebrations, and that's the part of life. Because people still call us a semi-nomadic tribe, because we have not really got into the modern phases, and uh, all of our livelihood, economy, and practices are more connected with these natures and lands.
Strong spiritual ties to land as a key factor shaping decisions not to migrate. This dynamic, often described as voluntary immobility, is rooted in identity rather than lack of awareness or choice.
And you said the word for land is bhumi. Bhumi is also, is that also earth?
Yes, yes,
Okay.
yes. Can they reflect few things?
Mm-hmm.
Because growing up as a Chepang, growing up as an indigenous Chepang, uh, was a full of hardship, because coming with these competing with these modernizations, and adapting to these new liberal economies, new liberal systems, and everything is driven by competitions, driven by markets. So the indigenous community living in the top of hills of Nepal is now made to compete through educations, because education is as a means uh, to tag people as qualified and not qualified. And once they are qualified, once they get good degrees, once they get higher educations, then they can go into employment sectors. They can get engaged in income generation activities as well. So so growing up in Chepang community is hard, although I was lucky to get access to educations from my childhood. But there are still my friends, my colleagues, who were not able to get those education access, and there are. And the other issue is that the community still does not have access to. Some of the community still does not have access to power supply. And there
Yeah.
is no access to roadways. People still need to walk for 6 hours to reach home from the nearest market, and the access to healthcare facilities is very poor. So although like we cannot complain each other, but those basic fundamental rights are still an issue for our community. And another one, the critical issue is the human rights issue on human rights issue on access to land. Because as we being indigenous people who have been living for decades and decades in that specific territory, those areas were classified as indigenous to our community. But our forefathers did not register those lands in their name. Although the government decided, like they mentioned, okay, this act is coming, you need to measure the lands that belongs to you. So but that was not done by that the land ownership certificate was not transferred to our forefathers. Once it was not transferred, then now we are facing the problem. My fathers are facing the problem, my uncle, my relatives are facing the problem, because once we do not have the land ownership certificate of that specific area, then we are being displaced, then we are being moved to another place uh, without any reasons. And sometimes, and there are people, my community people are still living, some of them are living nearby protected areas, some of them are living nearby national parks, and then they face the issues of displacement and evictions, using army and using elephants, and people have been pushed from those areas. And another recent issue that our community is facing is like the area that we live is also full of resources. There are resources of limestones and other some resources that is available. But as this world is transitioning to electric vehicle and all these net zero emissions and all these climate agendas things, people living in those area who are living in sacred lands, sacred areas, now those land possesses some very good critical minerals that is required for all these just transitions. And now what does the corporates, the big tycoon organization do is then they push those people from those area because they do not have registered land, and they just give few pennies, few amount, and people are forced to leave. They are made because they are shown some when once they are given some money, and they are just because they are pushed in such a way that, and they are told that as you don't have land ownership certificate, this will ultimately belong to government. So if you leave it now with this few amount, then it will be easy for you. So that's how the community is facing, and these are some of the issues that I have been capturing in
Mm.
my writings as well, and even in my workplace as well.
Migration does not always involve crossing borders. Biswash describes something quieter and harsher: displacement without leaving, a threshold crossed without consent.
Yeah, no, and you've written a lot, and I think some of those changes definitely were introduced, and you were alluding to that in the beginning, when different faiths were introduced to your communities, and you have especially written thoughtfully about the Christianity's presence in the Chepang communities,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
rather than asking whether it was good or bad, I'm curious what shifted inside of you, spiritually or socially, when Japan's spirituality and Christianity began to meet in your life.
Okay. So I have not yet converted my religion to Christianity. I still worship nature. I worship whatever the surroundings that is nearby.
Mhm.
So, what motivated me to write on this topic comes first, actually. And because once our community turns into Christianity, that's like once it converts, then and this is gradually loss of our own identity, loss of our traditional cultural practices, loss of our roots. So I felt that way, and I thought of writing this one. And people have converted because there is deficit of basic fundamental rights. For example, when there is no food to eat at home, when there is when they can't afford their children to go to good schools, when they can't afford to take the children to schools, so the Christianity comes in.
As we have noted in earlier episodes, faith transitions often occur in contexts of material deprivation. Biswash's reflection illustrates how religion can function simultaneously as support, adaptation, and cultural disruption.
And when there is deprivation, material deprivation, and other forms of deprivations, and when there is someone to come and support you, and that's how the Christianity comes in. I didn't. Yes, as you mentioned, I didn't really say that it is bad, but the children have got access to educations. Children have got some access to other sources, services, facilities that they couldn't have afford to do on their own. So these are some positive aspects that because once the children get educated, they can also get good source of income, and they can support their family, and at least they can light up their family, and it will be a bright side as well. But so the other side is like it erodes our cultures, erodes our practices, erases our traditional knowledge. So I wanted to write on that, and I highlighted that way.
No, and that's why I mentioned it. Yeah, I think in your writing you don't romanticize either tradition. I think
Yeah.
you are observing, and maybe you can explain that to the listeners, where Christianity, maybe disrupted Japan's spiritual life, but it also offered language, community, and protection, as you already mentioned, that people
Educations.
really
Yeah,
needed,
yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay. And yeah, and I don't know if you want to, maybe you can come up with an example of those things in terms of disruption, as well as, I mean, I think you clearly mentioned how Christianity has also offered protection. But maybe you can tell about the disruption of the Japan spiritual
Yeah.
life then.
Okay. So, and I have even inserted some hyperlinks where
Uh-huh.
Professor Diana Riboli, who is in Italy, she's a very senior professor, and I forgot the name of the university. She carried out this research around, like, I don't know, 10 or 20 years. She was doing this research about the Christianity and Chepang and the conversion, the issues, and some all other aspects of the bits and pieces of those parts. So, I think I have mentioned some of those things, that how cultures are being eroded through Christianity, and one issue that I think I might have highlighted there is, or I had also heard on the presentation that was carried out by Professor Dr. Diana Riboli, when she was in Nepal and she was presenting the issue, because son could not follow the practice, the death ritual, because the father is Simon and father belongs to, father is from the same um, Simonic religion, the animism practice that he has been doing since generations, but the son has converted his religion, and that was one issue. And these tussles also used
Mm-hmm.
to bring chaos in the family with these different beliefs. The family had to struggle in different parts of life, and sometimes meeting accidents, and maybe some could be superstitious, but those
Okay.
were connected to
Okay.
it.
Thank you. Um, I would like to move to climate changes. And it's often talked about
Mhm.
as something that forces people to move.
Yeah.
But for Chipang communities, what happens before the
Hmm.
movement? When the forests are thin, the food systems strain, and rituals become harder to sustain. Um, but still, the Chipang decided to many to stay, right? And what kinds of losses happen even when people
Yeah.
stay? Can you maybe tell us about that?
Okay, so I mentioned that our life, even my community still is more close to nature, and the lifestyle and the livelihood and every aspect, the socio-cultural practice is all connected with the nature. Uh, s- so and so we access those resources that is available in the jungle, the edible items, the foods, the daily needs. So we access from the nearest forest. But with these gradual movements and with these introduction of nationalization of forest act in Nepal as well, our people were made to, mm, I don't know, that gradually encroached our lands, because and the shifting cultivation practice that our indigenous community used to carry out is now being controlled. Now we can't shift from one place to another as the real trend indigenous traditional practice that we used to carry. And these nationalization of forest also stopped, encroached our practice. The community forest user group system that is considered as globally best practice of forest management all over, is best example for the global world in Nepal, uh, is hampering indigenous Chepang community and some other indigenous people living in those territories. And so I hope I'm connecting with the questions that you have asked. And so this is, so the resource, although the resource that is already available is now gradually decreasing with the decline of these resources, with these impacts of climate change. People are facing the issue of food shortages, and the same wild roots that used to be available is now gradually declining. So those are some of the issues that's coming up, and
Hmm.
uh,
And
yeah.
in terms of you know um, the Chepang families deciding to stay or to go. Um, yeah, how are those decisions being made then? What are the aspects that they are looking at? Because of, I mean, I'm asking this especially because of the linkages that you were explaining about with the land. But if the land is not being able to provide,
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Got it. Yes. 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 And the problem, no, it's not only about
Mm,
Chepang. The global problem is migration. It's not a problem, but that could also be opportunity. But the problem in Nepal
mm,
is rural to urban migration. So yes, everyone wants to move to the land of opportunities these days. For example, if we are in a city area, we want to move to America to find a better job, to get some dollars, there's a good amount of payments, and the people from village also wants to come to urban area for the sake of employment, for the sake of income generations, and so on, and for the sake of education, for the sake of health services, because just to cure their health as well, people need to move to those areas. So these are some modern factors that has pushed people to move out of their land. And although people do not want to move out from the land, and some of the forced reasons are like, as I mentioned, the national parks, the evictions from national parks, the introduction of these community forest users group, the introduction of nationalization of forest acts is making people move from one place to another because they need to move because they do not have their registered land. And so these are actually practical and real life examples that I'm mentioning. And I also mentioned about the just transition, about the extraction of resources, extraction of sand minings, and the extraction and the resources where they can get good pure water, and those corporates fill up and they just sell those water bottles to the so to the consumers, and people need to move from those areas, and people are even moved when they move from the area where they can get more sands. If there are more sands, then the corporate companies just they buy the entire territory, and people need to move out from that land. So those are now again more commercial and market and to top corporate people forcing people to move. Although they do not want to move, but the reason that people are made to move is, and they are just showing, they are shown the currency, the amount that they could possess, they can, and they can purchase something in the
mm.
city area, they can teach their children. So those are some of the reasons that they are made to move out. So but yeah, so connecting more into indigeneity, because although we do not want to move, not we, but for example, I now live in city for the sake of job, for the sake of employment, because if I stay back in the village, I may not get the same job. But one more opportunity that we can get is now, because we have with this COVID-19, now we can work online. Now I'm thinking of moving back to village. Mm, and yes, our forefathers, our grandfathers still do not want to move out from the land, because it's about the connections, it's about the, because when we are in that land, we have the traditional knowledge of that land, that area. For example, my grandfather knows where we can get those specific medicinal herbs in from that specific area, where we can. So those are traditional knowledge, and all those territories are named, even the naming are named in our own languages. So if we move to city area, then our language, our markings, our signpostings gradually loses. And when other people moves, they name it on their own language and name it on their own cultures. So these also moves out, and the knowledge that we possess from the jungle, possess on the jungles, and natural resources that do not really fit in, that do not really come out when we're in the city area. So these are things that that are like pros and cons of moving out. But yes, this is how it is going on.
Yeah. So although you might go move back to the village, I assume that this is happening. You're not the only one of the younger generation that moved out, maybe, or is planning to move. So when you think about the Japan youth growing up amidst climate change, religious pluralism, economic pressures, what worries you most? Is that the loss of the, of the knowledge and the wisdom that your grandfather has, or what is it that you worry most about for the youth?
The first thing is livelihood,
Yeah.
because my father still lives in the village, and with these issues, the growing issue of climate change and other issues that's coming up. So the first thing that it hits is our livelihood. When there is no rainfall, or when there is very less rainfall, and even the area that we live is more of a, we depend on monsoon rainfall for the agriculture. So that's again a problem, because we if we live in other southern plain of Nepal, that can like have a 3 or 4 crop rotation, they can produce more and more crops. But we live in more hilly area does not have access to rivers. and and that's very difficult to get irrigations to those agricultural land. And so we're hit very hard when we're living in those hills, because we cannot take irrigation system into those areas, and and we cannot grow good crops. So that's how we are hit hard. And the first thing that with this rise of climate issues, global warming, to this indigenous Chepang communities, the
Mm.
livelihood, and the livelihood, the traditional livelihood that we practice is gradually connected with even the cultural practice, ceremonies. For example, we have one specific festival in Bhadra Mahina, Bhadra month. So that's around, I don't know, September, October. But we need a particular type of crops that's required for that festival. But with these climate change, and sometimes it's very difficult to get those crops. And that was what my one of my relatives was explaining about the impacts on these cultural and spiritual practice due to these climate change issues as well.
Mm. And when you know, in my question around worry, you mentioned this
Hmm.
livelihood. So,
Yeah,
how,
yeah.
if you think about it and explain that to me, how does that feel?
So, okay, for example, the livelihood is, so when my the livelihood of my father is disrupted, when it declines, when
Uh-huh.
the issue rises, then it connects with all of our family members, because when he cannot grow crops on his own, when he cannot sustain himself in in the village, then I need to support as well. So that's how connected, how we are also connected.
Hmm.
And so what worries me most is, so climate change is not only about rainfall and all, but the rising air pollutions, the issue of respiratory issues, because so we are very highly impacted, even living in the city area. And so everything is, so it's not only about culture but health and even our lifespan. And it's not only about us but about our upcoming generations who are
Hmm.
impacted by it. So
Yeah, the future.
even the yes, yes, in the future. So
Yeah.
that's how it is. And yeah.
No. Okay. Um, uh, what gives you hope that something vital will endure?
So what gives me hope to fight on this issue is, mm, yes, there we still have some hope, because I'm currently working on this rights-based conservation issues, advocating for the rights of indigenous people on these conservations, for the justice, climate justice for indigenous people. Uh, because I've got some basic level of educations as well, and I have got this platform to discuss, to bring out on these issues as well. And I have been documenting, researching on grassroots level. I have been engaging in national level discussions of plans and policies that the government of Nepal is carrying out. For example, in NBSAP, National Biodiversity Strategy Action Plan. I'm contributing like what can be best for indigenous people and how we can do it. So we're just suggesting few ideas, even in nationally determined contributions, even in developing national adaptation plans. And so is a good chance to bring out those issues for the indigenous people from the grassroots level. That also gives me hope. And in international level as well, I have been engaged in these negotiations and dialogues in COP events and subsidiary body implementation events. And I'm also a member of informal advisory group uh, for conventional and biological diversity. So I also attended last meeting in Canada.
Uh-huh.
So there are few things that we can bring up, although like we cannot change the massive things, but at least we give some inputs, we sensitize, we pressurize from our own level. And I keep writing on these platforms. I love writing, although
Uh-huh.
my analysis may not be like top level, but I bring out the voices of grassroots. And so these are a few things that is motivating me to continue writing, advocating. And I also mentioned you about like my participation in politics. My main reason was to bring out the issues into, because when you work in NGOs, in community based organization, it is more trying to be more softer and just writing reports, and it's more of a softer power. Now when you really come into politics, it's like more being harsh and really raising those real concerns of those grassroots issues into this main house of representative, into the parliament. So and that can really bring change into the acts
Uh-huh.
and the regulations. That that pushed me. So these are
Uh-huh.
few things that I'm still optimistic. I know this time I withdraw my name, but I think I can do it later, and I still have hope that I can do some better for the community, better for the indigenous people in Nepal, and in around the world, because
Mhm.
I'm also engaged in global discussions.
Okay. No, thanks, Biswash. And just for the listeners, you told me before we started recording that you decided for now not to pursue your political career, and you may
Yeah,
pick it up
yeah,
later. But you
yeah.
have written a lot, and all of that has created, access at different levels, nationally, regionally, and globally to push these issues that you're so passionate about. And but you were also alluding to, maybe churches and NGOs and policymakers that you engage with, when talking about the Chepang communities. What do these groups, the churches, NGOs, and policymakers, misunderstand about spirituality, land, or resilience? Is there maybe something they think is cultural or symbolic that is actually essential for survival?
Okay, so this is a very tough question, and it's a multiple questions coming up together. I wonder if I can really answer to all of those. So, one of my explanations, or one of the worldviews that I bring out these days, is that indigenous people are being colonized, not colonized in those traditional senses, just like the slavery system and all those things, but our cultures, our practices, our spirituality are being colonized, and they are gradually being erased. Uh, so, so the worldviews, the lens that I really discuss, that I really bring into any platforms whenever I'm asked, is that, for example, the Chepang community who are living in those terrains, high hills, they had the knowledge of producing, cultivating the climate resilient crops already. For example, people had their own different crops that they were dependent on. They could grow, they could cultivate, they could harvest. But when these introduction of NGOs come, these organizations comes in, and they started giving hybrid seeds. They started giving hybrid seeds, saying that these are the climate resilient crops, these are the things that can be done in the village. So they gradually eroded those indigenous traditional practice that they were already doing, and it started like they are now occupying. those indigenous lands just in the name of those hybrid seeds and all, and just giving those jargons of these donor organizations. So that I often discuss on this issue, and the people living in those high hills, terrains, and different geography, different lands had their own way of life. For example, there is Raute community in Nepal who is still living in jungle, who still wants not to be in contact with outsider groups actually. But what the government is planning, what the organizations are planning, what the bigger organizations are planning is they want to them to resettle in one place, settle in one place. But the practice of that indigenous community is like once someone dies in that community, they move to another forest. But the area that they are living is so much sustainably managed that they don't do deforestations and all. But once they do, they also do it sustainably, and so they have their own way of life. So means the lens that the government or the organizations wants to impose is different. The people lifestyle, the territories that they want to grow up, that they want is the that they means indigenous people want is different. So this is how things are contrasting, and the practice, the spirituality, the cultures, all these things that people want and these organizations are trying to impose is different. I think this is more into what we call imposing are more like Western centric development approaches that the organizations are trying to force upon us.
Mm. So no, and I think because you move a lot between the life of the indigenous communities, Christian spaces, journalism, global conversations, you you are very much aware of these different perspectives and the tensions as well. Then, um, I would like to ask you though, where have you maybe seen unexpected openings for dialogue or healing across those worlds?
Okay, so one approach that I wish, not I wish that the indigenous worldviews are looking through indigenous epistemology, and that we can do is indigenous people's self-determined development. That means like letting the groups, letting the tribes, letting the Adivasi people to decide what is best for them, what is good for them, what suits for them, uh, so that this also uh, promotes harmonious life, promoting their traditional knowledges, practices, because this needs to be promoted because the global research of IBES, Intergovernmental Panel of Biodiversity Experts Groups, also mentions that the global population of 6.2% of total indigenous population is contributing to 80% of the global biodiversity conservation. And so this means like the indigenous way of life, indigenous practices, indigenous knowledge is contributing to these global biodiversity conservations, and which can be a very good role model for the global world to mitigate on these climate actions that people are facing. And there are very good examples in Latin America where there are indigenous territories are declared like, okay, these are 90% is indigenous territory. Even in New Zealand, the Maori community owns the land. Okay, this territory belongs to those Maori land. So no one can, no one can no one can overthrow on that. But so that means like the areas resided by indigenous people has their own sacred values, sacred practices that is contributing to all these things, global biodiversity. And for me, the indigenous way of life, indigenous living, I do not mean to say like going back to the hunting and gathering stage. The practice, the knowledge that needs to be promoted. So that's what I wanted to mention, because that is contributing to climate mitigation, climate adaptation strategies as well. Because and I was also engaged in one of the consultancy activities of GCF, Global Climate Fund project, and they gave me some task to document the indigenous traditional practices that is contributing to climate mitigation activities, to climate adaptation. So I was documenting some of those small practices that the communities are doing, even like the seed stories and all the I was trying to bring out all those things, stories, and I think that's what I wanted to share on this on that question.
Hmm. And no, and I think everything you're writing, and I will mention many of those links that you sent to me before in the podcast notes also. But your presence at the different panels, the different platforms is important. That dialogue starts with connection first, and I hope that this podcast will contribute to connecting people. And I'm going to
Yes.
connect you with the previous guest. The previous guest has a question for you, and the question is,
Okay.
I would like to ask the next person to tell me, please, what is life?
Okay. So what is life? A phase between birth and death. A phase between birth and death, where we are mercilessly competing for power, property, prestige. So that's what I'm facing these days. Like people, we are competing for power, we're competing for prestige, we're competing for money, and all of these things. But if we look through, I don't know through which lens do we need to analyze. Because if we look through Buddhism, so it should be about satisfaction, it should be about happiness and all those things. But these modern economies, neoliberal economies, is making us compete with each other so fast that yes.
if you would answer that question from Japan point of view.
Okay. Yes. If I could answer it from Chepang community, for me, life is about okay, connection with nature, because we are born in the territory and we die in that area. And so the phase is like where we are born, so we die in that same area. So it's steps, it's a phase between life and death. So the nature can, so we cannot beat nature, so nature is all of within us. So that's what I would say. Hmm.
Okay. What about your question for the next guest?
So my next question to the next guest would be, how would this the rise of artificial intelligence impact our life? So that is one. Okay, I have one more question. I'm worried about these real geopolitics these days. I'm really worried about how the United States is taking out all these hands from these UN agencies, and they are taking out their support on these big organizations, where they used to have a big funding. So my question would be more through a development approach, like how will the world move ahead with these geopolitics, with this fund crunch, and with these big countries dominating, those big powerful countries dominating the small ones. So two questions. So these two
Okay.
things are coming in my mind, because now it feels like we need to get worried. We need to be worried about all these things. We need to be prepared for all these things.
Okay. Two questions.
Just
Okay.
like being Jepang, being evicted, taken out from their territory, and I'm worried about like how these
Hmm.
small countries might also be just scrapped away.
Understood.
Mm.
Understood.
The report speaks of spiritual and intangible loss. In Biswash's words, that loss is no longer abstract. When sacred land is taken, faith does not disappear, it is wounded.
Mm.
If your journey had a soundtrack, a sound, a chant, a hymn, or a rhythm,
Mhm.
what would it
Mhm.
be and why?
Mm, for me, I like the sound of Om Mane Padme Hum actually. I sometimes I like the word Om, and it's a Hindu word as well. So that's like sometimes if I feel bad or if I feel something, then I say
And what does
Om,
that mean?
and
Oh, if I may ask.
Om is Om is uh I don't know. I don't know, but it's a more. I feel that's a Hindu word.
Mm.
Om
It
Hindu
calms you
word
down,
that
or
yeah, yeah. It's a calming and just pausing for a moment
mm,
and yeah.
okay. Um, for listeners working in faith development or advocacy, what is
Mhm.
one small but meaningful act of solidarity you would invite them into? And especially if they will never visit Chepang land themselves.
So for the people working on this faith and advocacy human rights issue, so we yes we must continue to support each other. We but we also need to respect their own culture practices, and um, that's how we can promote each other and promote their practices as well. Only this much.
Okay. Um, these conversations always go fast. Um, but before I thank you for today's conversation, is there any question that I did not ask you today that I should have asked you?
Thank you, Maurice. For now, so if I would ask you a question, so faith based means like how are you interpreting faith? Faith for this podcast and linking with the walk with the talk. Yes, I would ask this one.
So this podcast is going about me asking questions to you, right? Now you're bouncing the ball back.
Yeah.
So I will say that I will tell you after the recording is done. But
Okay.
how would you answer your question to me?
Mm, so so for me, I was a bit not sure about like what faith based means. I was a bit more linking with the Christianity only, but I wanted to know a bit more holistic part of like what faith could be and just linking with the walk with the talk. Yes.
And for sure, when I mean we have uh, the conversation today is about a special series building on the report that
Mm-hmm.
JLI and Christian Aid have made around climate and migration, and especially
Mm-hmm.
the role of faith-based organizations and faith
Okay.
actors.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And that tries to include all faith and
Okay.
spiritual wisdoms, etc.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What I'm looking for in the, let's say, the regular Walk Talk Listen podcast is what drives people. And very often, people
Wow.
are driven by a purpose, and that's
Yeah.
related sometimes with
Mm-hmm.
faith, sometimes with religion, sometimes it's the same, sometimes with spirituality. So that's what I'm looking
Yeah.
for. And so it's definitely
Okay.
not
Wow. Wow.
Christianity only.
Oh,
It's about
okay.
all different faiths out there and spiritual and
Mm-hmm.
wisdoms traditions. So
Mm-hmm.
and I'm
Thank you so much,
interested in
Maurice. Yes.
those changes that are happening as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because it's not static, right? It's
Yeah. Yeah.
continuously
Yeah. Yeah.
evolving and developing. So
Mm-hmm.
and my conversation today with you was really helpful and
Mm-hmm.
shed some light. And again, I would like to invite the listeners to check the links that I will mention in the podcast notes, because I think you have written very thoughtful and very worthwhile articles, and your perspectives are definitely something I encourage people to check out. So thank you for everything you do, for who you are, Biswash, and all the best.
Thank you so much, Maurice, for this opportunity. I hope we will meet someday. And thank you for letting me say this all this issue in this platform.
Okay, great.
Thank you for listening to this episode of our special series, Crossing Thresholds Religion, Resilience, and Migration, produced by JLI together with Walk Talk Listen. This conversation is part of our effort to bring new research to life through real stories that show how faith communities, Indigenous knowledge, and local leadership respond to climate impacts long before the world pays attention. If you'd like to learn more about the research behind this series, you can find the full report and additional resources on JLI's website, jliflc.com, and Christian Aid's website, christianaid.org.uk. You can also listen to more episodes at walktalklisten.podbean.com or on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope you'll continue walking, talking, and listening with us in the episodes to come.
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.